What if the place that helped build America's power also became the symbol of its industrial collapse? What if the steel that lifted skyscrapers, carried armies across oceans, and forged a nation's confidence was born in a single valley and then left to rust in silence? As you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, could this happen again? And are we already seeing the signs? Before we continue, subscribe to the channel, leave a like if stories like this matter to you, and write a comment. Answering this question, does the fall of Bethlehem Steel represent a failure of leadership or the unavoidable cost of progress? In the year 1857, in the modest town of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, a company was born that would one day shape the physical backbone of the United States. What began as a regional iron operation quietly expanded alongside the nation itself, feeding on ambition, innovation, and an unshakable belief in industrial destiny. As America pushed west, rose upward, and prepared for global conflict, Bethlehem Steel grew not just as a company, but as an institution woven into the identity of a rising superpower. By the early 20th century, the Bethlehem Industrial Complex was no longer merely a factory. It was a vast industrial organism, stretching across the Lehigh Valley, operating day and night in a rhythm of fire, steel, and motion. Blast furnaces roared without rest, rail yards pulsed with movement, and rolling mills shaped molten metal into the bones of modern civilization. Entire neighborhoods rose around the complex, built to serve it, depend on it, and live by its schedule. At its peak in the middle of the 20th century, Bethlehem Steel stood as the most powerful steel-producing force in the United States. From this single site came the steel that carried trains across continents, lifted bridges over rivers, and framed the skylines of American cities. The Empire State Building rose with Bethlehem Steel at its core. The Golden Gate Bridge stretched across San Francisco Bay, supported by metal forged in Pennsylvania. During both World Wars, the company became an arsenal of democracy, supplying massive portions of the United States naval fleet, weapons systems, and military infrastructure. More than 30,000 workers were employed at the Bethlehem site alone. Generations of families passed through its gates, fathers and sons sharing shifts beneath the same furnaces. For many, employment here was not just a job, but a lifelong contract with stability, pride, and purpose. What did it feel like to know that the steel you produced would travel the world, shaping history far beyond your hometown? The industrial complex functioned as a self-contained world. It generated its own power, managed its own transportation, and controlled every stage of production from raw materials to finished steel. Efficiency was measured in scale, not flexibility. Strength came from size, tradition, and volume. For decades, this model worked flawlessly, reinforcing the belief that American industrial dominance was permanent. But beneath the thunder of the furnaces, subtle cracks were forming. As global markets evolved and new competitors emerged, the very size that once ensured supremacy began to slow adaptation. Foreign steel producers, particularly in Europe and Asia, invested in newer technologies, leaner operations, and more flexible production methods. Meanwhile, much of Bethlehem's infrastructure remained rooted in earlier decades, expensive to maintain and increasingly inefficient. Labor relations also grew more strained. Rising costs, rigid contracts, and shifting economic realities created tensions between management and workforce. Could an empire built on 20th century assumptions survive in a rapidly changing global economy? Or was it already becoming trapped by its own legacy? By the 1970s and 1980s, demand for American steel began to decline. Imports increased, profits shrank, debt accumulated. One by one, furnaces were shut down, not with explosions, but with quiet finality. The glow that once lit the night sky over Bethlehem dimmed and then disappeared entirely. The industrial complex that had symbolized unstoppable power began to feel like a monument to hesitation. What happens when a nation built on production struggles to reinvent itself? And what is lost when the machines fall silent before the people are ready? These questions lingered as Bethlehem Steel moved closer to the edge, unaware that the collapse of an empire was no longer a distant threat, but an approaching reality that would soon redefine the landscape forever. As the furnaces went dark one by one, the silence that followed was not immediate. For years, Bethlehem Steel attempted to hold its ground, relying on the sheer weight of its past success to carry it forward. Executives believed that downturns were temporary, that demand would return, and that the dominance built over a century could not simply evaporate. But history was no longer moving at the pace Bethlehem Steel was designed to follow. The global steel industry had changed its rules. New producers overseas operated smaller, more efficient plants, often closer to ports and international trade routes. Their facilities were modern, automated, and cheaper to run. They could adjust production quickly, respond to shifts in demand, and undercut prices that Bethlehem Steel could no longer match without bleeding money. While competitors rebuilt their systems from the ground up, Bethlehem remained bound to massive furnaces, aging mills, and a production model optimized for a world that no longer existed. Inside the complex, maintenance costs soared. Equipment installed decades earlier demanded constant repair. Entire sections of the plant consumed energy without producing profit. Every ton of steel required more labor, more time, and more expense than steel produced elsewhere. The empire was still vast, but it was growing hollow, like a giant whose strength no longer matched its size. Workers felt the change before the official announcements arrived. Shifts were shortened, overtime vanished, entire departments were consolidated or eliminated. Men who had spent their entire adult lives inside the plant began to wonder if the promise of lifelong stability had quietly expired. How do you prepare for a future when your identity is tied to a place that may soon disappear? The city of Bethlehem was inseparable from the steelworks. Local businesses depended on steel wages. Schools, churches, and community organizations were funded by generations of industrial prosperity. As layoffs increased, the effects rippled outward, touching every corner of daily life. What happens to a town when its economic heart begins to fail? Not suddenly, but slowly, year after year. Attempts were made to adapt. Bethlehem Steel diversified into other industries, invested in new product lines, and restructured its operations. Yet these moves came late and often lacked the scale needed to reverse decades of inertia. Meanwhile, competition intensified, and global trade agreements accelerated the flow of foreign steel into American markets. The company was fighting modern economics with outdated weapons. By the late 1980s, the reality could no longer be ignored. Losses mounted, debt grew heavier, facilities were sold or closed. The Bethlehem Industrial Complex, once operating as a single unified machine, fractured into isolated remnants of its former self. Each closure marked not just the end of a production line, but the end of a way of life. Still, hope lingered. Many believed the company would find a buyer, reinvent itself, or receive support that would stabilize operations. After all, this was Bethlehem Steel, the backbone of American industry, the builder of bridges, cities, and fleets. Could something so essential truly be allowed to fail? In 1995, the answer arrived with brutal clarity. Bethlehem Steel filed for bankruptcy. For workers and residents alike, the announcement felt unreal, as if history itself had been rewritten overnight. The furnaces that once symbolized national strength now stood as liabilities on balance sheets, their value measured not in power, but in scrap. The years that followed stripped away the remaining illusions. Operations continued in fragments, assets were sold, and the company's identity dissolved piece by piece. By 2003, Bethlehem Steel ceased to exist as a company, leaving behind a sprawling industrial graveyard where motion and noise once ruled. What remains when an empire collapses without a single battle, defeated instead by time, technology, and global forces beyond its control? And is the fall of Bethlehem Steel a warning about industry, or about the cost of believing that past success guarantees future survival? Those questions echo through the rusting structures that still stand today, waiting to be understood. After the company vanished from balance sheets and stock listings, the Bethlehem Industrial Complex remained behind. Vast and unmoving, a landscape frozen between memory and abandonment. Steel towers, blast furnaces, and rail lines still dominated the skyline, but now they stood stripped of purpose. The machines that once defined progress were no longer productive assets. They were relics, too large to ignore and too expensive to erase. For the people of Bethlehem, the loss was not abstract. It was physical, visible every day. Empty parking lots replaced shift changes. Rust crept across structures that once glowed with heat. Windows shattered, roofs collapsed, and silence settled where noise had once been constant. What does it mean to live beside a monument to a life that no longer exists? Former workers walked past the gates and remembered exactly where they used to stand, which furnace they fed, which mill they operated, Their skills, honed over decades, suddenly felt obsolete in an economy that no longer valued them. Many were too young to retire and too specialized to transition easily. Retraining programs existed, but could they truly replace an identity forged in fire and steel? The broader American economy was changing as well. Manufacturing declined across the Rust Belt, replaced by service industries, technology, and finance. For cities like Bethlehem, the transition was uneven and painful. Jobs that replaced steel rarely matched its wages, benefits, or sense of permanence. A question lingered in the background. Was this transformation inevitable, or was it the result of choices made too late? As years passed, the abandoned complex became a symbol far beyond Pennsylvania. Photographs of its ruins circulated widely, representing the collapse of American industrial supremacy. Scholars, economists, and policymakers debated its meaning. Some argued it proved that globalization rewards efficiency over loyalty. Others claimed it revealed the danger of ignoring innovation in favor of tradition. But for those who lived there, the debate was not theoretical. It was personal. Gradually, conversations began to shift. Instead of asking how to restart the furnaces, people asked what could be done with what remained. Could the ruins serve a new purpose, or were they destined to decay forever? The sheer scale of the complex made demolition impractical. Its history made erasure undesirable. Slowly, an idea emerged: preservation without illusion. Sections of the site were stabilized rather than destroyed. Steel structures were left exposed, not hidden, allowing the scars of industry to remain visible. New spaces were introduced alongside old ones, blending modern development with industrial memory. The goal was not to pretend the past could return, but to acknowledge it honestly. Yet even as redevelopment began, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Where thousands once worked, now visitors wandered. Where steel once flowed, music and tourism replaced production. Was this renewal, or was it merely a softer form of surrender? Could culture and memory truly compensate for the loss of economic power? The Bethlehem Industrial Complex became a place of reflection. It forced observers to confront uncomfortable truths about progress. Industrial empires, no matter how powerful, are not immune to time. Dominance is not permanent. Systems built for one era can become burdens in another. The same scale that once ensures survival can later prevent adaptation. And still, the question remains unresolved. When America looks at Bethlehem, is it seeing a cautionary tale about complacency or an unavoidable chapter in economic evolution? Are these ruins evidence of failure or proof that history always moves forward, regardless of human attachment? The answers depend on perspective, but the steel still stands, silent and towering, waiting for meaning to be assigned by those willing to look closely enough. As redevelopment slowly reshaped portions of the former steelworks, the deeper lessons of Bethlehem's collapse began to surface with greater clarity. This was not simply the story of one company failing, but the unraveling of an entire industrial philosophy. For decades, American manufacturing had been built on scale, stability, and domestic dominance. Bethlehem Steel embodied that belief completely, trusting that size alone could shield it from disruption. But while the furnaces remained massive, the world beyond the Lehigh Valley was becoming faster, more interconnected, and less forgiving. Trade barriers weakened. Supply chains stretched across oceans. Steel was no longer a national product, but a global commodity. Price mattered more than pride. Efficiency outweighed heritage. The rules had changed, and Bethlehem was slow to recognize just how radically. Inside the company, decision-making struggled to keep pace. Investments favored maintaining existing operations rather than reimagining them. Modernization came in fragments instead of transformation. Each year of hesitation compounded the next. What seems cautious in the present can become catastrophic in hindsight. How many moments of opportunity passed unnoticed because success in the past felt like proof of security? Labor relations also played a critical role. The workforce that once powered Bethlehem's rise had won hard-fought protections, wages, and benefits during decades of profitability. But as margins shrank, these same agreements became sources of tension. Management sought flexibility. Workers sought survival. Trust eroded. The shared sense of mission that once united both sides fractured under economic pressure. This dynamic was not unique to Bethlehem. Across the Rust Belt, similar conflicts unfolded as companies faced shrinking markets and rising competition. The decline was not caused by a single decision or a single villain, but by a convergence of forces that rewarded speed and punished inertia. Could any steel giant built in the early 20th century have truly adapted without shedding part of what made it powerful? The physical presence of the Bethlehem Industrial Complex makes this question impossible to ignore. Its vast scale was once a triumph of engineering and ambition, yet that same scale locked the company into enormous fixed costs. Shutting down a furnace was not a strategic adjustment, it was a near-permanent retreat. Flexibility, the currency of modern industry, was structurally out of reach. As historians examined Bethlehem's fall, comparisons emerged with empires of the past. Like ancient powers that expanded beyond their ability to manage change, Bethlehem Steel mistook endurance for invincibility. Its decline was gradual, not dramatic. There was no single collapse, only a long erosion that became visible only when reversal was no longer possible. Today, visitors walking through the preserved sections of the site encounter a strange duality. The structures are both awe-inspiring and cautionary. They invite admiration for what humans once built, while simultaneously warning of the cost of believing that greatness is permanent. Can progress honor the past without becoming trapped by it? Bethlehem's story also raises broader questions about national identity. For much of the 20th century, industrial production defined American strength. Steel was more than material, it was a symbol of resilience, independence, and power. When that symbol weakened, it forced a reconsideration of what strength truly meant in a changing world. Is economic power rooted in physical production or in adaptability? Does a nation preserve its influence by protecting legacy industries or by allowing them to fade in favor of new ones? The ruins do not provide answers, but they demand the questions be asked. And as the steel skeletons continue to dominate the landscape, they remind us that every empire, industrial or otherwise, leaves behind evidence of both its ambition and its limits. As the 21st century advanced, the story of Bethlehem Steel began to settle into the national memory, no longer as breaking news, but as historical reference. Yet the forces that dismantled the company did not disappear. They continued reshaping industries across the United States, making Bethlehem less an exception and more a case study in a much larger transformation. Global competition intensified rather than faded. Steel production expanded in countries that had invested aggressively in modernization and logistics. These producers could deliver high-quality steel at lower costs, often supported by government policies designed to capture market share. Meanwhile, former American giants faced an environment where loyalty offered no protection against price and speed. Could patriotism compete with efficiency in a global marketplace? The legacy of Bethlehem Steel became particularly visible in discussions about national infrastructure and defense. For generations, the United States had relied on domestic steel for bridges, ships, and military assets. The collapse of its industrial backbone raised uncomfortable concerns about dependency. When production moves overseas, does strategic control move with it? Or can economic interdependence replace self-sufficiency without risk? Communities like Bethlehem were forced to reinvent themselves. Education, healthcare, and service industries became central pillars of local economies. Some former steel towns succeeded in this transition, while others struggled under the weight of lost identity and limited investment. The path forward was uneven, shaped by geography, policy, and timing. Was survival a matter of planning or simply luck? The preserved remains of the Bethlehem Industrial Complex began attracting a different kind of attention. Artists, filmmakers, and historians saw meaning in its exposed steel frames and towering furnaces. The site became a stage for memory, allowing people to confront industrial decline not through statistics, but through space. Walking beneath those structures invites a confrontation with scale, ambition, and loss all at once. For former workers, this transformation was bittersweet. Recognition of the site's historical importance validated their labor and sacrifice, yet celebration could never fully replace what was taken. Pride remained, but it coexisted with grief. How do you honor a past that no longer supports your future? The decline of Bethlehem Steel also reshaped conversations about education and skills. Jobs that once required physical endurance and technical experience increasingly demanded adaptability and digital literacy. Entire generations found themselves caught between eras, trained for a world that vanished faster than anyone expected. Could society have softened this transition, or was disruption unavoidable? In national discourse, Bethlehem became shorthand for industrial decline, often cited in debates about trade, labor, and manufacturing policy. Some argued the company's fate justified protective measures. Others insisted it proved that resistance to change only delays collapse. The ruins themselves remain silent on the issue, offering no endorsement, only presence. Yet their presence is powerful. The steel still stands because tearing it down would erase too much. It forces a reckoning with the reality that progress does not move in straight lines. Growth creates shadows. Innovation produces casualties. Every era builds monuments that the next must interpret. As the sun sets behind the towering remains of the furnaces, their silhouettes stretch across the valley, unchanged by time's arguments. They do not ask to be saved or restored. They simply exist, challenging each observer to decide what their story truly means. As decades pass, the Bethlehem Industrial Complex occupies a unique place in the American imagination. It is no longer viewed solely as a failure, nor purely as a triumph. Instead, it stands as a transition point between two economic eras, marking the moment when industrial certainty gave way to global uncertainty. Few sites capture that shift with such physical clarity. The steel that once flowed through these furnaces built more than structures. It built confidence. For much of the 20th century, American industry operated with the assumption that growth was both natural and permanent. Bethlehem Steel did not merely participate in that belief, it reinforced it. When the company fell, it exposed the fragility beneath assumptions that had gone unquestioned for generations. Economic historians often point to Bethlehem as an example of path dependence. Decisions made in moments of success shaped the range of future choices. Investments optimized for mass production limited flexibility later. Labor systems designed for stability resisted rapid change. What once guaranteed dominance eventually restricted adaptation. How often does success plant the seeds of its own decline? The physical complexity of the Bethlehem Industrial Complex made transformation extraordinarily difficult. Retrofitting massive furnaces for new production methods required capital that the company no longer had. Closing them erased revenue without eliminating debt. Every option carried irreversible consequences. This trapped leadership in a narrowing corridor of choices, where delay felt safer than decisive change. Beyond economics, Bethlehem's story carries a human dimension that statistics cannot capture. The pride of skilled labor, the rhythm of shift work, the shared identity forged under heat and pressure, all vanished faster than they could be replaced. When work defines community, the loss of work becomes a cultural fracture, not just a financial one. Younger generations grew up seeing the steelworks not as a workplace, but as a backdrop. For them, the ruins were normal, even beautiful in their way. This generational divide shaped how the story was remembered. Is Bethlehem a tragedy or simply history? The answer often depends on when you were born. The site's continued preservation ensures that the questions remain visible. Unlike abandoned factories that fade into obscurity, Bethlehem's scale demands attention. It refuses to disappear quietly. Each rusted beam invites reflection on how societies manage change and who bears the cost when adaptation fails. National conversations about reshoring manufacturing and rebuilding domestic industry often return to places like Bethlehem. They raise difficult questions. Can modern industry recreate the stability once offered by companies like Bethlehem Steel without repeating their vulnerabilities? Can innovation coexist with long-term employment, or are these goals now in tension? The ruins offer no solutions, only evidence. They show what happens when systems built for one century confront the realities of another. They remind us that industrial power is not just a function of resources, but of timing, flexibility, and vision. Standing beneath the towering structures, it becomes clear that Bethlehem was not destroyed by a single force. It was reshaped by many, converging slowly until resistance became impossible. The lesson is not that decline is inevitable, but that adaptation delayed can be adaptation denied. And as the steel frames continue to cast long shadows over the valley, they invite a final question that remains unanswered. What industries today believe themselves immune to the same fate? In the years since Bethlehem Steel disappeared, its story has increasingly been used as a mirror rather than a memory. Economists, policymakers, and educators return to it not to mourn what was lost, but to understand what must be avoided. The ruins do not accuse, they instruct quietly and relentlessly. One of the clearest lessons lies in the cost of delayed transformation. Bethlehem Steel recognized change was coming, but recognition did not translate into reinvention. Incremental adjustments replaced decisive shifts. Modernization was pursued cautiously, often too late to matter. In rapidly evolving systems, hesitation can be as damaging as ignorance. How many industries today sense disruption approaching, yet move slowly because the present still feels profitable? The story also exposes the limits of scale. For most of the 20th century, size equaled security. Massive plants promised efficiency, bargaining power, and stability. But in a globalized economy, size without flexibility becomes risk. Smaller, modular systems adapt faster, recover quicker, and respond more precisely to market shifts. Bethlehem's dominance, once its greatest strength, gradually became its heaviest anchor. Another enduring lesson is the relationship between communities and industry. Bethlehem was not simply a company town, it was a shared ecosystem. Schools, neighborhoods, and identities evolved around steel production. When the company fell, the social structure fractured alongside the economic one. Transition plans focused on markets, but often underestimated cultural loss. Can economic policy truly succeed if it ignores identity and belonging? The transformation of the Bethlehem Industrial Complex into a place of memory has allowed these questions to remain alive. Unlike statistics in a report, physical space forces confrontation. Walking among the remains is a reminder that economic systems are lived, not abstract. Every decision echoes in real lives across generations. At the same time, the site challenges simplistic narratives of decline. Bethlehem Steel did not fall because of laziness or incompetence. It fell because it was built for a world that changed faster than its foundations allowed. This distinction matters. Blame offers comfort, but understanding offers preparation. As the United States debates its industrial future, Bethlehem's shadow stretches far beyond Pennsylvania. Discussions about advanced manufacturing, automation, and domestic supply chains often reference the past, even when focused on the future. The question is not whether industry should evolve, but how to ensure evolution does not abandon those who made earlier prosperity possible. The steel frames still standing today are reminders of ambition realized and ambition exhausted. They demonstrate that greatness leaves traces, but not guarantees. Each generation inherits both the benefits and the limitations of what came before. Bethlehem's ruins do not ask to be restored to their former function. They ask to be understood. They challenge observers to look beyond nostalgia and beyond blame, toward responsibility. Responsibility to adapt, to anticipate, and to recognize that strength lies not only in what is built, but in the willingness to change what no longer works. As long as those structures remain, the conversation they provoke will continue, quietly shaping how the future interprets the past. As time reshapes memory, the Bethlehem Industrial Complex has come to represent more than the collapse of a single corporation. It stands as evidence of how nations transition, often unevenly, from one economic identity to another. The steel that once defined American power gave way to ideas, services, and digital systems, yet the transition was never clean or universally beneficial. For policymakers, Bethlehem highlights a critical imbalance. Economic change often moves faster than social adaptation. Markets adjust, capital relocates, and technology advances, but people remain rooted in place. Families cannot migrate as easily as investment. Skills cannot be reinvented overnight. When industry moves on, entire communities are left negotiating the gap between past contribution and future relevance. This gap reshaped trust. In towns like Bethlehem, confidence in institutions weakened as promises of stability dissolved. Generations had been told that loyalty and hard work guaranteed security. The fall of steel challenged that belief at its core. When such assurances collapse, what replaces them? Flexibility, uncertainty, or skepticism toward any promise of permanence? The physical remains of the complex intensify this reckoning. Their durability contrasts sharply with the fragility of the systems that sustained them. Steel endures longer than the economic logic that produced it. This irony gives the site its power. It forces viewers to confront how temporary even the strongest arrangements can be. Educational initiatives tied to the site increasingly frame Bethlehem as a learning space rather than a relic. Students study it to understand globalization, labor dynamics, and technological disruption. Instead of glorifying decline, the narrative emphasizes comprehension. Understanding failure becomes a form of preparation. The site also reveals how memory evolves. Early responses focused on loss and anger. Later interpretations emphasized resilience and reinvention. Neither fully replaces the other. Both coexist, shaping a more honest understanding of transformation. Is it possible to acknowledge pain without becoming trapped by it? As industries today face automation, artificial intelligence, and shifting supply chains, Bethlehem's lesson grows more relevant. Change is no longer measured in decades, but in years. Adaptation delayed risks irrelevance, yet adaptation without consideration risks fracture. Balancing these forces remains one of the central challenges of modern economies. The Bethlehem Industrial Complex offers no blueprint, but it offers perspective. It shows that decline is rarely sudden. It accumulates quietly, masked by routine and familiarity. Warning signs often appear long before collapse, ignored because acknowledging them demands uncomfortable change. Standing beneath the remaining steel structures, one realizes they are not symbols of defeat, but of consequence. They show what happens when momentum replaces foresight. They remind us that every system, no matter how dominant, carries an expiration date shaped by its ability to evolve. And as the landscape continues to attract reflection rather than production, it poses a final question that refuses to fade. When the industries of today reach their turning point, will the lessons of Bethlehem be remembered or repeated? By now, the Bethlehem Industrial Complex exists in a space between past and future, neither fully abandoned nor fully reborn. Its presence forces a confrontation with the long-term consequences of economic decisions that once seemed rational, even inevitable. What appears logical in one era can become limiting in another, and Bethlehem stands as proof of that transformation. The collapse of Bethlehem Steel did not erase the demand for steel itself. Bridges still require strength. Cities still rise. Infrastructure still depends on materials born from heat and pressure. What changed was the structure of production. Efficiency, logistics, and technological integration reshaped the industry, leaving behind those unable to move at the same pace. This distinction matters. The decline was not the end of steel, but the end of a particular way of producing it. Understanding this helps clarify the true lesson of Bethlehem. Industries do not disappear because they are no longer needed. They disappear because the methods that sustain them fall out of alignment with reality. For former workers, this realization can be difficult. The value of their labor did not diminish, yet the system that rewarded it did. That disconnect fuels frustration and disbelief. How can something so essential become obsolete? The answer lies not in usefulness, but in structure. The ruins themselves highlight this truth. They are not small, forgotten factories. They are immense, carefully engineered systems that performed exactly as designed until the world they were designed for changed. Their failure was not mechanical, but contextual. Bethlehem's story also reframes discussions about innovation. Innovation is often celebrated as progress, but it carries consequences that extend beyond balance sheets. When efficiency increases, labor demand shifts. When automation rises, traditional skills lose market value. Without deliberate planning, these transitions create winners and casualties simultaneously. This reality places responsibility not just on companies but on societies. How much obligation exists to those displaced by progress? Is adaptation solely an individual burden or a collective one? Bethlehem does not answer these questions, but it exposes their urgency. As the United States and other nations consider rebuilding industrial capacity, Bethlehem serves as both inspiration and warning. Reinvestment without adaptability risks repeating old mistakes. Adaptability without social consideration risks deepening inequality. The challenge lies in refusing false choices. The industrial landscape in Bethlehem endures because removing it would erase evidence of these tensions. It allows future generations to stand inside the consequences of past decisions. That physical experience cannot be replicated through data alone. As sunlight filters through rusted beams and shadows stretch across silent ground, the site communicates something no report ever could. It shows that progress leaves traces, and those traces demand accountability. The story is not finished. The meaning of Bethlehem continues to evolve as new challenges emerge. Each generation will interpret its lessons through the lens of its own uncertainty. And as the steel structures remain, immobile yet expressive, they wait for the final question that defines their legacy. When the moment of choice arrives, will foresight overcome comfort, or will history once again move faster than those who shape it? In the end, the Bethlehem Industrial Complex stands not as a relic of failure, but as a record of ambition carried to its limits. It tells the full arc of an industrial empire, from birth to dominance, from dominance to stagnation, and from stagnation to silence. Few places reveal so clearly how power is built, sustained, and ultimately lost. Bethlehem Steel succeeded because it mastered the logic of its time. It organized labor, capital, and technology into a system capable of producing at a scale the world had never seen. For decades, that system worked exactly as intended. The problem was never competence. The problem was that success hardened into certainty. When the world changed, certainty became resistance. The systems that once ensured reliability could not bend without breaking. Modern industry demanded speed, flexibility, and reinvention. Bethlehem offered endurance, tradition, and mass. Those qualities once priceless became liabilities. The ruins make this truth unavoidable. They show that strength without adaptability becomes fragile, that dominance without renewal becomes delay, and that delay, when extended long enough, becomes collapse. Yet the story does not end in condemnation. Bethlehem Steel was not wrong to exist. It was necessary. It built the physical framework of the modern United States. Its steel carried millions, protected nations, and shaped skylines that still define cities today. Its legacy is real, measurable, and enduring. What failed was not the past, but the assumption that the past could defend the future. Today, the Bethlehem Industrial Complex invites a deeper reflection. It asks whether modern societies are prepared to recognize when systems must evolve, even when they still appear strong. It asks whether comfort is being mistaken for stability. And it asks whether progress is being pursued with awareness of its human cost. As new industries rise and old ones transform, Bethlehem offers a warning written in steel. The warning is not that change destroys, but that refusal to change concentrates destruction. Adaptation is not betrayal of legacy. It is the only way legacy survives. Standing before the silent furnaces, it becomes clear that history is not kind to those who believe permanence is guaranteed. Empires, whether industrial or political, do not fall because they lack power, but because they misjudge time. The steel remains because it deserves to remain. It is evidence. Evidence of what humans can build when ambition, skill, and opportunity align, and evidence of what happens when alignment fades, but momentum continues. Bethlehem's story is not finished because it no longer produces steel. It is finished because its lesson has been fully written. The question now belongs to those who inherit the future. When today's industries stand at their own crossroads, will they recognize the moment Bethlehem did not? Or will the silence of the furnaces repeat itself elsewhere?